Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller. It's July 15th, 2002. 5-year-old Samantha Runnion is playing with a friend in her front yard in Stanton, California. A man approaches and asks the girls to help find his lost dog. He then grabs Samantha and forces her into his car. A day later, Samantha's lifeless body was spotted by hang gliders in the Cleveland National Forest. She'd been sexually assaulted, strangled, and staged. The sheriff promised the perpetrator on national television, "You can't run, you can't hide, we're going to find you." They did just that.
Welcome to Behind the Crime Scene, where we take you beyond the yellow tape and into the lives of first responders, investigators, and prosecutors who work true crime. I'm Gina Osborne, retired FBI Assistant Special Agent in Charge and former Army Counterintelligence Agent.
And I'm Tracy Miller. I've been a prosecutor for over 23 years, prosecuting some of the most violent criminals, including gangs, juvenile sexual assault, and domestic violence cases.
Today's show is part 2 of a 3-part series on the Samantha Runnion case. Not only will we continue our interview with prosecutor Dave Brent as he takes us into the courtroom on the Alejandro Avila trial, but we'll first speak with Samantha's mother, Erin, to learn how she coped with this terrible tragedy. Now let's go behind the crime scene with Erin Runnion.
We would like you to tell us a little bit about what was Samantha like?
Oh, Samantha was joy. She was an incredibly bright and creative little girl. And she started just about every day either drawing a picture or running out to her swing set and swinging. And I used to joke actually that she was going to be a lawyer because so often I would come home from work and she would have left me a note that said, are we going to the park today? Yes, no, maybe, sign here. She had the whole contract written out.
It sounds to me like she was such an independent little girl.
She really was, but she was also super sweet. Like she was, when she was born, her first nickname from me was Turtlehead because at 3 days she was lifting her head to look at me when I was holding her. And she would just stare at me in the eyes with those big brown eyes, and everything she seemed like I almost feel like at some level in her heart, she knew she didn't have a long time here because she was in such a hurry. She was learning how to walk and cruising around on all the furniture when she was 8 months old. With every kind of accomplishment, she did these little victory dances. Like she was very determined to get good at things quickly. My favorite was when she could open the sliding glass door for the first time to the patio, and she pulled and pulled and pulled, and she just kept trying day after day. She kept trying, and when she finally pulled that thing open, she did this little victory dance, and then she went outside and she pulled and pulled and pulled and closed it back, and then she suddenly realized she had shut herself outside, and she's looking at me through the glass like, Mom,
let me in, Mommy.
We've gotten so much feedback since last week's episode from people 18 years later that remember where they were when it happened and remembered looking at all the pictures of her. And I just don't know if you'll ever grasp, Erin, how many lives she touched.
Yeah. It really blew my mind when I started writing my memoir a couple of years ago. And when I looked back at all of the dates and the numbers, it just blew my mind. I mean, I think about the motorcade to her memorial service and the thousands of people who were there. It was an outpouring of support that really, at a time when I had every right to lose all faith in humanity, it was thousands and thousands of strangers who gave me hope and strength that this could change and that we could actually do better in terms of protecting our children.
How did you decide when it was time to make the decision? Was it a conscious decision that you wanted to go to court every day?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It was a conscious decision. I had learned so much so quickly from the investigative process, and we met with the DA several times, and Dave Brent couldn't have been more wonderful to us. But there was a whole team that he led, and they explained, we had a meeting with the team, and they explained what this process was. I had never heard of Kelly hearings, but I needed to know if there was any piece of evidence that was not going to be admitted into the trial. I wanted to know that, from everything I knew from the investigation, there was no doubt that he was going to be convicted. But of course, if some of that key evidence doesn't ever get heard by the judge, then things could go horribly wrong. And so I had to be there every day. And when it came to the actual jury trial, I had to be there to represent Samantha. That was my role. That was all I could do, was to make her real for people.
Where do you find the courage to be able to get up every morning and go to trial and being in the same courtroom as the man who took your child? I mean, where does that come from, Erin?
Oh, it really did. The whole thing was surreal, and it did turn my stomach. It made me physically ill. But at the same time, I just kept going back to the thought that no matter what I am feeling, no matter how much grief and anger I feel, nothing, no amount of pain will ever come close to the horror and the suffering that Samantha went through at the age of 5. And the least I can do is show up and do my absolute best to give her the voice that was taken from her.
So it sounds like you got your strength from being her mother.
Yeah, well, yes. She was amazing. I really thought she was going to change the world. She was my purpose. I was an idealistic young college graduate, and I had all these dreams of being a advocate and a positive force in the world. And when I found myself pregnant before I graduated college, I was like, this is my purpose. This little person, I have to give them every opportunity to be a positive force in the world. And then she came and was so much smarter and more brilliant than I could have ever dreamed, and that I could ever live up to. But the world lost someone amazing.
Did you look at the defendant when you went into court every day?
I did, yes. Yeah, I think that he didn't look at us ever, at least not intentionally. I mean, he literally just exuded coward in all of his mannerisms. He would turn away immediately. He only focused on the desk where he was walking to, and just, he had I can't even describe his mannerisms, but everything felt weak. He barely moved his muscles.
Did you decide whether or not you were going to look at the evidence, the pictures, when Dave Brent was presenting the case?
I did not. I did not look at the pictures. And I had been warned that the pictures were graphic, and my mother had been the one to identify Samantha's body. And when she volunteered for that in that moment, she's like, you have to let me do this. And when she came back, she said, that can't be your last image of Samantha. You can't have that picture of her come into your mind every time you think of her. But she said that I do want you to know that she looked angry. She looked like the little fighter that she was. And she did. She was barely 40 pounds, and she fought this man who was over 200 pounds. She scratched him till he bled, and that helped convict him.
Now let's go back to our interview with Dave Brent to talk about the trial of Alejandro Avila. You spent a lot of time with Erin Runnion. How did you prepare for the day that you were going to share the photos of the crime scene with the jury and have to do it in front of her?
The day when that evidence was going to come out, I told her what was going to happen. And we were using lots of visuals. We would have evidence and documentary evidence and photographs go up on screen so everybody in the courtroom can see them. But with those photos of Samantha's body, I didn't do it that way. I had the actual 8x10s that I held so the jury could see and nobody else.
What was the reaction from the jury when they looked at those pictures?
Gasp.
Yeah.
There were some tears. There were tears as well.
These were the photos of
her body.
Yeah, she was found. He had taken her clothes off, and he had, in essence, posed her. And so they were disgusting, in the true sense of the word disgusting. And I mean, they just caused such just a horrible reaction. Ultimately, when he was arrested and his computer was seized from his apartment, like elsewhere, there was child pornography on his computer. I mean, so he was into this sort of thing. This is the sort of thing that obviously aroused him and gave him a sense of power and gratification. And that people like a jury who has never been exposed to this, it's going to cause a reaction in them that is going to, in the sense of a trial strategy, of course you want, but in the sense of, you don't ever want to put any people through things that are like that. You feel bad about that, but that's the job, right? As a juror, they have to review the evidence. They had to think about the fact he had child pornography on his computer. I'm trying to remember. We had in the penalty phase, he had a pretty disgusting child pornographic story on his computer, and I was not able to read it. It was pretty bad. We were able to refer to just that there was a story. The judge, and I didn't blame him. The judge hated that story more than the pictures. I didn't blame. It was really bad. At ultimate sentencing, you knew that Judge Frober had no use for this guy, and that he was very offended by the murder that Avila had committed. I didn't like Avila either, but I was duty-bound to ensure he got a fair trial.
In a nutshell, what was the evidence against him?
We had the drawing. We had the DNA evidence, which was probably the most compelling. So his evidence on her evidence in his car. There were footprints made by this Nike Defender detonator, I think it's called a detonator shoe, that we had an expert that matched that type of shoe to the footprints. He was seen wearing that type of a shoe on video at, most likely Samantha was in the car when he was at that Arco, that ATM, or that Arco station. And we could see that shoe on his foot in the video. We later found a box in his bedroom that was for that kind of a shoe, although like I said, we never found the shoe itself. I was able to put on those 3 girls that he had been accused of molesting in Riverside County, and even though he's acquitted, the test for that kind of evidence is preponderance, not beyond a reasonable doubt as far as the guilt phase goes. And we had a hearing, and the judge allowed it. At the penalty phase, to consider evidence of other crimes, it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And so by definition, was not proven that way. And so I remember telling the jury and the judge as well that they could not consider the evidence that they had considered in the guilt phase of those prior crimes. But, with everything else you have, that becomes pretty damning that you've been charged with, and you have 3 girls come in and testify to what, you've done that is along the line of what he had done to Samantha. So that was pretty much it.
You had mentioned Alejandro Avila's trial took only 3 days and he was convicted of murder. During the death penalty phase, Erin Runnion had her opportunity to say her piece. What can you tell us about that?
Transcripts in the capital case. And so by the time you argue it, you have every word in the trial. And in the penalty phase, you have access to it. Erin Runnion had given one of the most beautiful statements I'd ever heard. And when I got that, I remember writing it down by hand, part of the statement she gave. And then many years ago, in the notes section on an iPhone, I wrote down those words. And as I've upgraded iPhones, they've just always transferred over. And every so often, I'll go look at that. I'll look at what she said. You know what? Do you want to hear it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, here it is. This is not very long. This is Erin Runnion at the penalty phase. What just infuriates me is I know she thought that somebody would save her. I know she believed in heroes. She he believed that the good guys always won. And that's why I think she fought so hard, because she thought she would win. But it's just, she was so proud, and she died so humiliated, her entire vision of the world devastated.
Wow.
I don't read that without getting emotional.
Right. Gina and I are both crying as you read it.
How do you say that a child that did nothing was humiliated? I mean, those were such strong words. I understood exactly what she was saying when she said it. And I understood that when you think of a loved one dying in such a horrible way, the humiliation, even though, she's dead. But it's after, in Erin's mind, who knew her daughter, and so I believe what Erin said, that she would have felt, when's this going to end? When's my mom going to come find me? When, I know that that's how Samantha felt, and it just made it so much worse. It's not like he knocked her out and killed her. Like, it's not like he gave her the courtesy, if he was going to do it anyway, of not making her suffer through what she suffered through. The time with him in his car, the fear, the waiting for something to change. This is a 5-year-old he's doing this to. And he makes her go through that. She's alive when he sexually assaults her. She's alive until he hits her on the head. She had blunt force trauma. And then ultimately she died because he choked her to death, strangled her. This guy has put her through that. And so in arguing for death, this is the sort of stuff. I don't remember my argument. I have it written. Actually, I have it somewhere. Should have reviewed it. Although not that important, but I know clearly this is what I would have been talking about, right? This is now appropriate for the jury to impose a death sentence, and it did not take them very long. I don't remember the exact time, but they convicted him pretty quick, and they sentenced him to death pretty quick. So,
Dave, how did this case change you?
Well, I had been sort of, I grew up thinking, I think that every life has value, and I do to a certain degree. Well, no, I do believe now that every life potentially has value.
Right.
But I'd kind of been on the road for a while leading up to this to Samantha's case that some of these guys are so bad because you'd hear in defense presentations that they could have value in prison, sentence them to life without parole. They could do this, they could do that. They might even bring in jail records or jail witnesses to talk about what they've been doing since they've been arrested. But I've been kind of slowly going towards not really believing that every life had value. And by the time this case was done, I knew for a fact that not every life had value. I don't think his life had any value. I didn't think, and he's on death row, and he's, may never be executed, and that's a tragedy to me. I'm not a bloodthirsty person. If he dies in prison, so be it. But in my opinion, he's just, he's a waste. He's a waste of space, for want of a better word. And so and that hasn't made me view humanity any different, because I still believe the vast majority of people's lives do have value and potentially have great value. But it made me realize that there are people who can cause so much devastation physically through death and psychologically through the pain they inflict, that it'd really be better if they were not around. They weren't in this world.
That was so emotional, Gina.
I don't even know what to say right now.
I'd heard the facts. I sat in some of the courtroom. I've met Erin Runnion several times, but that quote that Dave read, that she testified to, I'll never forget that the rest of my life.
I was at the command post. I think it must have been the day that they found Samantha Runnion's body. I just remember everyone was quiet and devastated at the way that she was found. It was just a terrible, terrible crime scene. And I'll tell you, the sheriffs did an amazing job. It was a huge collaboration with all law enforcement. You know, her memory will always be there for us. It was just such a sad case.
One of the things that just struck me, and the reason that you and I decided to do this podcast, is Dave Brent's been retired for years. And 18 years later, as he's talking about this case, he still gets choked up.
Yeah.
And the type of person that does this type of work, because you have to carry that pain of Erin Runnion to be able to convey it to the jury. And you can tell he did. He carried it and conveyed that message and still carries it.
Well, and I can't imagine having to convey that message in front of the victim's mother that way. I mean, just having to say those words to the jury in front of the horrible monster who did that to this woman's daughter. And how strong is Erin Runnion to be able to sit through that? And she has, do you want to talk about her?
Yes, so Erin Runnion started the Joyful Child Foundation. She has been passionate about the work, and it's a very successful foundation to prevent predators from hurting children. Go to the Joyful Child Foundation and see the great work that she's done, and how this mom of a 5-year-old little girl is transferring her pain for good.
Yes, and we'll talk more about that in part 3 of this 3-part episode.
And until then, please like us on Facebook, Behind the Crime Scene.
Subscribe through your favorite podcast provider.
Yes, subscribe. We would like subscribers. We're on Twitter at Behind the Crime 2 and on LinkedIn.
And on Instagram at Behind the Crime Scene. So join us on these social media platforms, or even drop us a line on our website at behindthecrimescene.com. We would love to hear your thoughts or comments, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Crime Scene.
Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller is produced and edited by Lisa Osborne. Theme music is Insomnia by retired IRS Special Agent Clarissa Balmaceda. Find us on social media through BehindTheCrimeScene.com. And don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Osborne.